All right. Wonderful to see so many of you sitting cozy in your own homes. Maybe some of you have lit a candle, or you have some incense burning, or something wonderful to set the mood for Advent. That is the intention of this gathering, is with some content to enforce or to continue the mood of Advent that may be present, hopefully, in many people's lives, and also to prepare the path to Christmas, to a celebration of Christmas. This is going to be kind of a historical romp through religious life from the beginning of time until now. So with that enormous span of time, obviously it's going to be a little bit dashing over the surface of things. But my intention is really in the sense of to ask, how have the forerunners of our Christian civilization, how have they paved the way? And how can we, if we gain a deeper understanding of what has gone before us, how can we then have a firmer foundation for our own spiritual, religious work in today's world, practically, spiritually, and so on. And for me, everything always starts with the prologue to the Gospel of John. And there's a funny story about that has to do with my biography. Some of you may have heard this story, so forgive me. It's very short. I was living in Cologne, Germany in 1979, and a friend who lived in Italy was going to leave Cologne and go back home. And he showed up at our front door one afternoon with a white plastic bag and said, "I have some things that I think you would like." So we chatted for a while, we said goodbye to him. And about a week later, I looked into the white plastic bag to see what he had brought us. And lo and behold, there were 5 basic works of Rudolf Steiner in this white plastic bag. Now, I had heard of Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf School, never heard of the Christian community at that point. And after a while, I took these books out, and they were Cosmic Memory, there was Theosophy, there was Knowledge of Higher Worlds, the Gospel of John, and one other that I've forgotten. And I thought, wow, Gospel of John, I'm a religious guy. I want to see what this Rudolf Steiner has to say about the Gospel of John. So my then fiance and I were leafing through this book to see what this man, Rudolf Steiner, had to say about the Gospel of John. And it was really hard to find anything about the Gospel of John in that book, because those of you who know these lectures from Hamburg in 1908 will remember that it's a very good description of the great cycles of human development. Old Saturn, old sun, old moon. I thought, what is this for nonsense? I threw the book in the corner, it landed under a dresser, and I forgot about it for several weeks. And then at some point, we were straightening up our apartment, and there's this bag of books again. I thought, this guy, Rudolf Steiner, he doesn't know anything about the Gospel of John, and all he talks about is old stuff. Then I thought, well, let's give him another chance. So we pick up Knowledge of Higher Worlds, and lo and behold, he says one of the best things you can do to start your day is to do a short meditation on the first 5 verses of the Gospel of John. And I thought, now he's making sense. This I understand. Gospel of John, reflect on the first 5 verses. And to be quite honest, I've been doing that since 1979. It's been the basis of my spiritual religious life. And I could hardly start anything in this work without somehow referring to the first 5 verses of the Gospel of John. So that's what we're going to hear right now in the version that I contemplate. And then I will get to the topic, believe me. In beginning was the Word, the Logos. And the Word was turned towards God. and God was the Word. This was in beginning, turned towards God. All things came into being through the Word, and nothing that came into being was created in any other way than through the Word. In the Word was life, and the life was the light for human beings. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And right away, after these rather monumental words comes, and there came into being a human being. He was sent by God, his name, John. This is historically a huge jump in the gospel. From these last words of the prologue, the light shines in the darkness. There we are at the very beginning of earth time. And suddenly there we are with John, the baptizer. So our contemplation this evening is going to fall into that space between the light shines in the darkness and there came into being a human being whose name was John. And this is going to be a story of how human consciousness developed through the ages and who were the main players, the main characters, the main workers in this development. And if you want all the details, of course, there's always occult science, there is cosmic memory, and there is a lot of literature that will answer all the questions that you don't need to ask at the end of this talk. It's all in the literature, believe me. I'm just going to hit the highlights. So these words from the Gospel of John take place before the beginning of everything. All was one. That's easily said and difficult to imagine. But try to imagine a word where there weren't trees and cars and chairs and Andre next to me and all of you out there and all of this that we now see that has expanded into this enormous creation of the planet Earth and the other planets and the stars. All of that was contained in the idea of God. In beginning was the Word. And already we have a movement. The Word resounds. It's turned toward God's in the beginning, and then finally it's life, it's light, and it shines in the darkness, and the Word goes forth. This Word, however, stayed in the spiritual realm for a long, long time and worked from the Spirit into humanity. So if we go really far back, we can look at in the cycle by Rudolf Steiner called Approaching the Mystery of Golgotha, in the lecture on June 1st, 1914 in Basel, he speaks of the three sacrifices of the Christ before the mystery of Golgotha. So we're going way back before Atlantis, in Lemuria, where the human senses began to develop. Light penetrated the human being. Sound began to penetrate the human being. The senses developed because there was something to sense. There was something to see and hear. And these senses, as they began to develop, also wanted to take in what was there. They hungered, they thirsted, they desired to take in as much as possible. And we can probably relate to that when we read a good book, when we walk through a beautiful forest or something like that. We want it all. We have a lot of control over ourselves. And back then, the human being was much more open to its environment. And if this development had continued in the same way, the human being would have more or less completely disintegrated into the world around it by taking in all of these sensory perceptions and would have simply ceased to exist. Christ, the Logos, the Word, was able to work through an archangel being, says Rudolf Steiner. An archangel being was willing to offer itself to the Christ, who could work through it to take away this selfish aspect that the human being was showing through the sense world, through the sensory organs. And through this working, through the archangel, Christ was able to harmonize, to bring into balance the human senses, so that that part of humanity, as it developed, became completely unselfish. And it is now so that our vision, our hearing, our sense of taste is actually completely neutral. How I feel about those things and what I want with what I see, that's another story. But our eyes, they're just there. They see, sometimes not so well, but they're a neutral channel for the sensory perceptions. And so it is with our others. Thanks to this intervention way, way, way long ago by Christ through an archangelic being. Let me see here. Rudolf Steiner gives a lovely example of how the human being then could look around in the world, will gradually learn to develop a deep and significant appreciation for what he's seeing in nature. When the human being looks to the starry heavens and the sun illumines the plant and the animal and the mineral kingdom, the human being would say something like this, that I am so placed in the world that I can look at it around me, my senses being instruments for the perception of its splendor rather than sources of pain. I owe to Christ's first sacrifice in preparation for the mystery of Golgotha. You can almost see the human being just looking up in admiration and astonishment at all the things that are there to see and hear and touch and taste. In taking all this beauty into ourselves, we must realize that it is not ourselves, but the Christ within us who enables us to experience this. And so this went on into the Atlantic period, where the inner organs begin to develop. And the inner organs work preferably together. And it isn't one of the organs that wants to dominate the others. But this began to happen, that within the human being, the heart, the liver, the stomach, the spleen, the kidney, the one or the other would develop itself in such a way that it threatened to overpower the other organs. Every single organ was, so to speak, selfish, was seeking its own good, without respect, without even knowledge sometimes, of the others. And here we have a working together of those beings we call Lucifer and Ahriman. Lucifer was involved in that first episode with the senses. I forgot to mention that. And now these two are working together in a way to bring the inner organs into a state of chaos by creating a kind of a war of all against all in that whole area of the inner organs. And so once again, an archangelic being offers its own forces, itself as a vehicle for the Christ, who through this being is able to reach into the world of humanity and bring harmony into the working of the organs, so that the individual organ is no longer selfish, is no longer seeking its own ends, but is also able to work together with the other organs. The individual organs are, in a way, subdued and harmonized. And this is another important step toward the being of Christ being able to come into the earth. He's still working from the spiritual world through an archangelic being, balancing the inner organs, rendering them less selfish, more selfless. And again, Rudolf Steiner gives a characterization of what the human being then could speak, could say. I realize that I am able to exist as a physical human being with unselfish organs because not I alone have developed myself in the world, but Christ in me, who has so conditioned my organs that I can be a human being. Not I, but Christ in me. This we will, not this evening, but as we go through the letters of Paul, we run into this particular statement many times. A realization that Paul was able to feel very strongly in his work. And then in the later part of the Atlantean period, a third danger arises within the human being. The soul forces of thinking, feeling, and willing are once again threatened by this aspect of selfishness. The individual aspects, thinking wants to override willing, willing wants to drown out feeling, feeling wants to take all the space so that the other two qualities have nothing to say, nothing to do. And once again, those evil forces that we love to name Lucifer and Ahriman are working together to bring this aspect of the human soul into a state of chaos. And Christ, again, the creative word, the Logos, working from the world of spirit, shining light into the darkness, works together with this archangelic being to bring, once again, harmony into the working together of these soul forces, so that thinking, willing, and feeling, once again, can work together in harmony within the human being. Christ has ensouled himself into this archangel, and the power that is generated in the spiritual world reaches into the realms of human beings, so that from the supersensible world into the sensible world, thinking, feeling, and willing are in harmony. So now we don't have the passions overriding the rational mind. We don't have a lot of crazy stuff going on, although human beings have managed to do that anyway. And so humanity moved on. The Atlantic catastrophe takes place. Humanity has been expelled from paradise. The fall has taken place. And slowly but surely, departing from Atlantis, some to the west, some to the east, human beings come more and more in contact with the earth, which, as Rudolf Steiner tells us, in those days was not the solid ground under our feet that it is today. It was still very much a movable, fluid, how should we say, not a sturdy, what's the word I'm looking for? Place to walk, in any case. So one of the greatest groups of human beings that headed east landed in the northern part of what is now India. And commensurate with the state of humanity at that point, these individuals who landed in what is now northern India were not 100% connected to the material earth. They were, in fact, very much still very, very open for the impulses out of the world of spirit. One could almost say they were still so connected to the world of spirit that they considered the world around them, the concrete world of plants, animals, minerals, to be an illusion. The only real truth for these folks was in this world of spirit. And the people who landed there in the north of India also retained the clearest memories of the time in Atlantis, of the time when the world of the spirit and the world of the earth were very, very strongly connected, so that there was hardly any difference between waking and sleeping and being here and being there. And something of this attitude carried over into what Rudolf Steiner then calls the old Indian period. And just as in Atlantis, there were great teachers, there were always individuals who had deeper, broader, stronger insights into the way that human beings were created, into the way the cosmos and the earth work together, in the way to access the highest spiritual beings. These teachers, we would call them master teachers or initiates. In this Indian period, there were the 7 holy rishis, these 7 human individuals who had the closest, the most immediate connection with the spiritual world. And into these 7 holy rishis, a particular spiritual individuality was able to work. This individuality did not incorporate, did not incarnate, but was very much permeating the holy rishis. And this individual was known as Vishva Karman. We might say this is a first appearance of a Christ-like being expressing itself through other human beings. Remember, before, in the Lemurian Atlantean period, Christ was working through an archangel. By the way, there's a lovely passage in this lecture that I mentioned earlier, where Rudolf Steiner more or less says, please, people, you would think that an angel would be closer to the human being than an archangel. Please don't ask me why Christ worked through an archangel and not an angel, because I do not know. How many times did Rudolf Steiner say those words in his lifetime? One could wonder. The honesty of this man is extremely admirable. I say it a lot because there's a lot of things I don't know. In any case, it's good to know sometimes. This Vishva Karma would have been, again, a spiritual individual who works from the spiritual world through other human beings, through the holy rishis. And the rishis, part of their task was to point to this Vishvakarman and point to this being and say, look up to the sun. And you will see in the descending light, in the descending rays, the source for all growth on earth. As it is with the human being, what you see with your eyes is only the physical expression, the expression of something invisible, hidden within the sun. All the world, all that is in the world, physical, is the expression of what is superphysical, what is spiritual. With the light of the sun, also spiritual beings penetrate the earth. The outer physical garb is the spiritual sun, Vishna Karma. One day, a time will come when this central being of the sun will show up in a completely different form. This might have been one of the first prophecies spoken about how the creative force of the Christ would be appearing on the earth. Vishvakarman was most likely an expression for Christ in the old Indian period. Civilization moves on. It moves westward. And as it moves westward, the human being becomes more connected with the concrete surroundings in the earth. It begins to occupy itself more with the earth, with the laws that govern life on earth, that govern the seasons, the growth of the plants, the cultivation of plants, the growth and development of the animal world. In fact, sometimes they got so interested in what was going on around them that it could have been easy to forget their spiritual origin. And in this period that is then called the Old Persian period, related to that country we now call Iran, Iraq, that area, there was again a great teacher, Zoroaster or Zarathustra. And it was his task to help people remember their origin in the spirit while they were beginning to understand the laws of life on earth, how to cultivate, how to work, how to make things happen that were necessary for their survival. And Zarathustra pointed to the sun as a garb for a force that lives not only within the sun, that was still Vishvakarman, a force that lives within the sun, but that also at the same time lives within each human being. Here is a new step in the development of consciousness. The Holy One is not only out there in the great cosmic realm, personified by the sun as a physical expression, but is also in me, an old Persian person, way back when. The divine being that lives in the sun also lives in you and me. Not such a difficult idea for us in the 21st century, but for them who had come from not so long ago in the course of eternity, a few thousand years, who had come from the great Atlantean civilization, had lived through the stage of development, barely touching the earth, now finally getting used to the earth, becoming interested in all the things going on around them, but then suddenly remembering, oh yes, we have an origin that is not of this earth. It's not in this earth. What is Zoroaster teaching now? It is in me. Christ in me. Again, there was a representative of the Christ working through Zoroaster, working through the other initiates in this old Persian period, called Ahura Mazda. This is the name for that divine being who lives in the sun and who is slowly taking root in each human being as the expression of the divine being residing in the sun. And it was also in this Persian period, this Zoroastrian period, that the differences between light and dark became more distinct, that the teachers worked a great deal with fire, the element of fire, as also being the element of light. And remembering that fire not only starts on the earth, but has its origin in the sun. So more and more, the physical world is becoming an indicator of its spiritual origin. Then humanity moves further west, becomes more implanted in the earth and its interests. We have a kind of a double identity in this next period, which is often called the Egyptian Chaldean. So these two rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates, are streaming through this area where the human being becomes very much interested in the relationship between the spiritual world and the world of earth, where it's becoming more and more clear that there are two separate realms, connected but distinct from one another, where the people in this period began to realize when they stand on the earth and they look out into the stars, that is another world, slowly but surely beginning to realize that there are patterns in the world of the stars, the planets, the sun, the moon, that those heavenly beings move, and in these movements, influence reaches the earth. So it's now not so much the idea that one enormous being is working through a group or a group of holy teachers, not the rishis or not Zoroaster, but many, many different initiates, many different schools of initiation arise in this time. And one of the foremost studies in these schools is becoming acquainted with the world of the stars. So we might say astronomy, astrology were not two separate sciences at that point or two separate art forms. They worked together in helping people understand when to plant, when to harvest, when to marry. The children were mostly born at the same time. So the fertility of the human being was very much connected with the world of the stars in this so-called Egyptian period. And human beings further conquer the physical world. They become masters of their trade. And if anyone has stood in front of the pyramids in Egypt or the Sphinx and looked up at these magnificent works of art and realized there were no cranes, there were no machines, there was nothing with the power of the gadgets that we have now to move heavy objects, to get these beautiful temples into place. There had to be a very competent working together with spiritual beings in order to realize these amazing buildings. And there was a kind of a Messiah-like figure in the Egyptian times, Osiris. Very fascinating story of one who is killed, even chopped to pieces and scattered into the world. And in a way, this Osiris legend shows how the world of spirit is distributing itself within human beings into the world of earth and not getting lost for the world of spirit. Because the legend continues that the pieces of Osiris are put back together and he revives and becomes a great leader. Again, a Christ-like figure was put to death by those around him and who arises again out of the world of death with new powers and new possibilities. So we've gone through the old Indian period with the holy rishis and Vishvakarma as the spiritual guide, the Christ-like figure. The old Persian period with Zoroaster as the earthly representative, Ahura Mazda as the Christ-like inspirer from the spiritual world, and now the Egyptian Chaldean period, where people become more and more competent with life on earth and create a truly scientific connection between the world of spirit, as far as it is visible in the world of the stars, and the earth and life on earth. And then we get closer to the period that we actually have documents, what Rudolf Steiner calls the Greek-Latin period. And we're about 700 years before the birth of Christ. And in Greece, the spirit, the world of spirit, the life of the spirit begins to show itself in works of art. And the works of art from this period in Greece show a great, great harmony. Every statue that you see, the forms of the human being or the animal, the muscles, the limbs, the face, the head, is all absolute perfection. One can almost say that the archetype of the human being comes to expression in the Greek art. Objects are painted or sculpted in an absolute symmetrical fashion, very beautiful to behold, very harmonious. Nothing that upsets us, or like this picture behind me kind of puts a question into your mind, so as to say, well, who is that staring at me, looking over my shoulder? And gets you going. It's good. It's very good that these are here. Every time we have a meeting here in our branch, we're looking at one of these beings. And they're kind of looking back at you. But the Greek art was very different. The temple was built in a beautifully harmonious way. The columns were placed exactly as they should be. The art of building was developed. And what for our purposes, perhaps even more important, people began to think. They began to create philosophy. And not only that, but human beings' names are now connected to their individual works. If we go back much before the Greek and Roman period, we won't find any work of art. Let's say you go into the pyramids in Egypt, and you find these magnificent representations of life after death. There's no signature down in the bottom corner who painted all of this. It wasn't important that an individual was doing this. Slowly but surely, however, as we enter into this Greek and Roman period, the individual is stepping forth much and much more as being the author of its works. It's still mostly so that we don't know who the sculptors or the painters were. We don't know exactly who built and who designed and built the temples. But the works of philosophy and the works of theater carry the names of their creators. And this is a very important step. It's no longer automatically assumed that everything that appears on the earth as an expression of the divine comes straight from the divine, but comes through a human being. And that human being takes responsibility for what it produces, be it philosophy, be it play, be it a short story. And in Rome, similar things occurred. And what became very important in Rome was the individual personality, the idea of citizenship, of belonging to a state, not only to a family, to a tribe, to a village, to a region around a mountain, but to be a citizen of a state, and a state that had forms of government that were not only one single monarch, but that had a broader basis, where we often like to say the beginning of democracy took place in Rome. On the other side of the Bosporus, developments had long been taking place in the Hebrew people. Yes, I just have to check my time. We still got a few minutes. If we're going to, we're going to have a look at the Hebrew world and its contribution to this development of consciousness, we're going to have to back up a little bit, excuse me. We back up about 3,000 years, give or take, to the beginning of what Rudolf Steiner called the Kali Yuga, or a period of darkness. And with that, he doesn't mean that suddenly the atmosphere of the earth got dark and the sun didn't shine, but he means partially what was said in this 5th verse of the John prologue: the light shines in the darkness. The world and life on earth is becoming denser. The Atlantic catastrophe has taken place. Noah, the great Manu, has landed on earth again, but on a hard earth. It is so that it is an earth that has been purified, that has been rid of many elements that were not helpful. And so we see Noah and his sons, and then we see a human being born around 3,000, born at a period when there was a prophecy that a male child would be born who would one day chase all of the kings from their thrones. And the king at that time, whose name was Nimrod, feared greatly for this prophecy. He believed it. It was credible to him. And what did he do? He had all the little boys who could have possibly been born in that period murdered. An enormous bloodbath took place. Perhaps also a fitting introduction to the Kali Yuga, to the period of darkness, that this dreadful task took place. But there was a set of parents who had a son who were successful in hiding this particular child in a cave. The depths of the earth, this child, I don't know if he was born there, but lived in this cave for 10 years, spent the first 10 years of his life living deep under the earth in a cave. And this child is known by the name of Abraham. So you go back into your Old Testament, into Genesis, and you will find a lot of stories about Abraham. It would take several talks like this to delve into his life and his influence. I'm only going to mention a couple of things. First of all, it's remarkable that a child has this destiny of spending the first 10 years of its life within the earth, at a time when the earth had just been purified by the great flood, had been rid of those elements that were disharmonious, but also rid of everyone else his own age. And this one child within the earth, feeling, not consciously, I'm sure, but experiencing the dynamics of this under the sub-earthly realm, becoming acquainted in its childlike nature with the forces of the earth. This child grows up, and we could say at this point something very important is happening in the general development of the human being. Prior, what we would call the realm of our life forces, anthroposophically speaking, the etheric body, was much, much larger than our physical aspect. So that our life forces easily merged with the life forces of people around us, the world of the plants, the animals, even the minerals, the earth. And slowly but surely, this life forces aspect of the human being was slowly growing into the physical and becoming one with the physical aspect. So that this representative of all that streams and flows within us, the organs and so on, what is represented by the etheric body comes more and more to be at one with the physical, including, and not in the least, our ability to think with our physical organ. And Abraham is thought to be the first human being who developed the possibility to think with his physical organs. That you could actually say was part of his mission on the earth, was to develop that organ within himself that was able to form independent thoughts. And once again, his own thoughts, not separate from the world of spirit, but his own thoughts that had come about within his own being. A wonderful place to read about Abraham is the book by Emil Bock. I believe it's called Genesis in English, Urgeschichte for the German readers. It goes up to Abraham and a couple of figures around him. I'll say something about it. And the next volume in that series, called Kings and Prophets, takes up the story with Moses and then everything that happened after him. So we might say, even though it sounds not so fine, that a period of darkness, this Kali Yuga, begins, but it has the aspect that life on earth becomes much more connected with the earth and with earthly beings right there in that Israeli, what we now call Israel, Sinai Peninsula, around in there. Pendant, you might say, to what's going on in India and in Persia, as that expression of human consciousness moves west. Something else is happening there in the Israeli world. One of the other beautiful moments in Abraham's life is that he awakens out of sleep and goes out of his tent, and he hears a voice or voices that say to him, "Look into the heavens. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the heavens, as numerous as the sand on the shore of the sea, and as numerous as the dust under your feet." And at this point, Abraham has no child. His wife, Sarah, is unable to bear a child, and she organizes that her servant will bear a child to Abraham. And thanks to this word from the divine realms, Abraham is encouraged to unite himself with this woman. And from there on, his son, Isaac, becomes, so to speak, the cornerstone of the Hebrew people. And the Hebrew people really begin to take their identity from Abraham on. We have the Old Testament before Abraham, but that is not the Hebrew people yet. Noah, Adam, Eve, Seth, all of those were not part of the Hebrew people. They are forebearers, of course. But the story that I actually want to end with is the encounter of Abraham after he has fought a long, arduous battle in the Valley of the Kings, where you might say he has fulfilled this prophecy of victory over the kings of the earth. And he steps into this Valley of the King and sees a human figure. Is it a human figure? Coming toward him. And he sees this figure carrying two objects. This figure is carrying bread in the one hand, the cup in the other hand. And as these two meet, Abraham and Melchizedek, so is his name. Melchizedek serves Abraham bread and wine. And Abraham, in return, gives to Melchizedek a tenth, or we would say nowadays a tithe, of all that he has acquired in this battle. And then this Melchizedek disappears from world history. One brief encounter with this very central figure, Abraham, who carries this enormous responsibility for founding the line of succession all the way down to Jesus Christ, has met a being of enormous dimension. It's actually not until the letter to the Hebrews was written that more was known about this Melchizedek. I'm going to read you a passage from the 7th chapter of the letter to the Hebrews. This Melchizedek, of whom we are speaking, is king of Salem, or Jerusalem. He is the priest of the highest God. He went out to meet Abraham, who was returning from the war of the kings. He blessed Abraham, and Abraham gave him a tenth of all that he possessed. His name, when translated, means, firstly, King of Righteousness. And then he is also called King of Salem. That means King of Peace. He is without father, without mother, and without ancestors, without beginning of days or end of life. He is of similar nature as the Son of God, and he is a bearer of priesthood forever. Imagine how great he must be that Abraham, our patriarch, sacrificed a tenth of all the spoils of war as an offering to him. As you know, those sons of Levi who have taken on the task of priesthood were given the instruction to receive titles from the people according to the law, that is, from their brothers who themselves are descended from Abraham. But the one who is without ancestors received the tithe from them by accepting it from Abraham, and he blessed the one who was the bearer of the promise. And that goes on for a while. But if a true stream of consecration flowed through Levitical priesthood, why was it necessary to institute another priest of the order of Melchizedek, of whom it is expressly said that he does not belong to the succession of Aaron? Or if there's been a transformation of the priesthood, it necessarily follows that the role of the law has changed too. And so this goes on with a bit of a dispute about the right for priesthood and so on and so forth. Something very important appears here is that on the one hand, this Melchizedek is described as one without father, without mother, without ancestors, without beginning or end of days. In other words, an eternal being, a being who is not of this earth, but who has appeared to Abraham in a very concrete form, offering him bread and wine and receiving in return a tenth of all the spoils of war that Abraham had just acquired. That's the one side. And then we heard that in this Levitical priesthood, the priesthood was spoken to the priests by the people. That's an interesting development, that the people recognize the priesthood of those who have received it by descent, they have inherited it from their father, their grandfather, and so on and so forth, all the way back. But it is necessary to be recognized by human beings and to be carried out among human beings. And so we have in Melchizedek a being that is very Christ-like, that is coming toward the human being, Abraham, the bearer of that promise. Your descendants will be as many, as numerous as the stars, as the sand, as the dust. They will populate the life forces. They will populate the physical world. They will populate the world of soul. And then comes Melchizedek, much later in his life, and brings this blessing of bread and wine. And it's not too difficult to see in this gesture of bringing the bread and the wine to see a forerunner of the Lord's Supper, of that last meal that Jesus of Nazareth, bearing the Christ, celebrated with his disciples, which then in turn gave the new impulse to begin the practice of following Christ. And so this went on through the Hebrew people, through the thousands of years between Abraham and the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, which you can follow in the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. All of the names of the fathers and 5 of the mothers, good to note, show up and show us how from Abraham, who received this call from the spiritual world to populate the world as richly as the stars of the heavens, has passed on this quality that is maintained by the Hebrew people through the centuries. And we come then to the 10 Commandments. We come to the 613 rules and regulations listed in the book of Deuteronomy and Numbers. These rules that if you would read them all and say, if I had to follow all of those rules, I would go crazy. No one individual could possibly do that. But in the community of the Hebrew people, where everyone worked together to form the perfect vehicle for the Messiah. All of these rules were not rules, they were ways of life. They were ways of working in the world, being part of the world, and at the same time, maintaining the consciousness of their origin, remembering where they came from. In a way, performing many of the tasks that the old Indian civilization and the old Persian civilization were also going through at that time, coming closer and closer into the confrontation with the forces of the earth, at the same time maintaining the connection with the cosmic origin. So we could, of course, spend the whole semester or 2 or 3 going through the Old Testament and finding all those places where this Christ-like being appears again and again. Just to name a couple, we might say that in a figure like Moses, who was able to climb the mountain, who was able to stand in front of the burning bush, who was able to ask the question, "Who are you?" And who was able to hear the answer, "I am the I am." And then carried this consciousness with him back down the mountain. Later in that same consciousness received the 10 Commandments, brought them back down into humanity, and gave those as a guideline, as a law, really, for the people through the next ages to come. And down through a figure like David, like King David, who was not only a king, but also a poet, a singer, where you see there's another individual who kind of rises up out of the great mass of individuals and is able to reflect, is able to look upon his own deeds and his many misdeeds. David was anything but a little angel. David was very much a man of this world. And then the last figure I would, of course, if you open your Old Testament, you'll run across a number of prophets. There are so-called major prophets and minor prophets: Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Elijah in the book of Kings. The one that stands out very much to me is Daniel. Daniel was abducted to Babylonia. They tried to make him live like a Babylonian, but he could only survive, he could only remain healthy if he maintained the way of life that was possible for him back in Jerusalem. And so he was allowed to worship and to eat and to live as a good Hebrew man, and maintained a certain spirituality that enabled him to become part of the life there in Babylonia, where you could say this inspiration from the world of spirit, now through an individual human being, through his ability to interpret dreams, his own and those of the king, enabled something of that energy, of that inspiration from the spiritual world to enter a space where it had more or less been lost. So we see this world of spirit working through, first of all, highly trained, deeply initiated human beings in the Atlantic period, the periods after the Atlantic catastrophe, slowly but surely graduating into totally earthbound human beings: Abraham, Moses, David, Elijah, the major prophets, the minor prophets, all of these people who showed up at the right time to help the Hebrew people awaken again to its mission, which was thought or afraid of, was in danger of being forgotten. And so we see these people paving the way toward the moment in time when those children Jesus, described by the Matthew Gospel and described by the Luke Gospel, would be born and would enter into the life of the world in many ways as pretty normal boys with some very special gifts, and who were then able to prepare the human body through all kinds of adventures to receive one time in the course of humanity the complete being of the Christ. So that we might say with the baptism in the Jordan, that aspect that we hear in the beginning of the John Gospel, the light shines in the darkness, begins to take root within an earthly human being, the being of Jesus of Nazareth, through the ministrations of John the Baptizer. Again, a human being, a high initiate, was able to assist in this incarnation of the Logos into a human being. And well, the rest we'll talk about after Christmas. So thank you for listening. I don't know if we have time to make any remarks or ask questions or not. Maybe people are hungry. It's dinner time in most places, right? Or is there anybody here from Hawaii or from, what else was on your list? The Philippines or Moscow? I only hear you in real life, but not.
Hello, I'm in Perth, Western Australia.
Oh, who's that from Perth?
Antoinette.
Hello, Antoinette. Thank you. What time is it in Western Australia?
Thank you. Oh, it's about 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, thank you for getting up on Sunday morning. I see
I'm in Perth too.
I'm sorry?
Oh,
I'm in Perth too.
All right, two Perthians. Thank you.
who are you? Who's the other Perth person?
Jen.
Oh, Jen, hello. Sorry. I didn't recognize your voice.
Oh, how lovely. In Chicago.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really appreciate. It's the first time I've tuned into you, and I will be tuning in again.
Oh, I see. All right. This is Andre, the moderator. Sure.
We don't hear Andre.
Ah. Okay.
Wondering if you can come back in 3 minutes and with your questions. So 3 minutes break. Thank you.
Did everyone hear that?
Yes.
All right. Very good. And feel free to go back.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
We're not hearing whoever's speaking. We're not hearing that person.
Can you, is this audible now? Can you hear, Christine?
Yeah, we can hear you,
Okay.
Craig. We just can't hear whoever else is speaking.
The moderator was just thanking me for the talk and saying that anyone who would like to ask a question should do what?
Put cursor on reactions, which is bottom of your screen. Can you hear me now? Yes, and click on raise hand. So we already did. Excellent.
All right.
So Christine, you are first. Please unmute your machine and go back. Ask your question.
Did Andre just ask me to ask my question?
Oh, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't hear him.
We don't understand why this is not working. Andre is sitting 2 inches from me.
Yeah,
Why you can't hear him is a mystery.
So you
it is mysterious, but we can't.
Andre has a wonderful Russian-based voice. He should be completely audible. But all right, I'll moderate myself. So Christine, you raised your hand electronically.
Yes.
What would you like to say?
So thank you for this Zoom. It's a Zoom as in speed through history.
Yes.
And my question is, so you mentioned, Vishnu Kadman for Persia and Ahura Mazda for the next one.
That was Persia, actually, but okay.
Okay. And then Osiris for Egyptian Chaldean. And then you didn't say anything for the Greek Latin period. Is that Christ? Jesus?
Interesting, huh? That there isn't one great, enormous spiritual leader in those eras. You have all of the Greek philosophers, all of the Roman philosophers and states people. I guess they were mostly statesmen back then. But there isn't, as far as I know, one of these great teachers. So it really does point to the Christ as being the dominant leader of that period.
Okay.
I would say so. I see another question by Roger. Thank you, Roger. I'm going to quote Rudolf Steiner and say, I don't know. Roger wonders, it's in the chat if you want to read along. Roger Ringe from the Los Angeles area. Is there a connection between the archangelic being involved with the pre-earthly deeds of Christ and the Nathan soul? Could be. I don't know. Something to research. Any other hands being raised? Let's see here. Go to the other screen. No hands raised.
I have a question. So does Anne. My quick question is, do we know the name of the archangels that sacrificed themselves or offered themselves?
No, at least I don't.
Okay.
And I see a lady named Aunt or Aunt.
Antoinette.
Oh, this is Antoinette. All right.
Yes. Hello. I'm just wondering, through the Advent period up to Christmas, how I can participate personally in this journey somehow. Is it to do with all the senses and organs, the sacrifices, or what is the modern way for me somehow to connect more?
Wonderful question. That would be a whole evening in itself, practically. But of course, that's just a weak excuse for everything that has 4 steps seems to work well in Advent. There is the one practice of concentrating the first week of Advent on the world of the minerals, then the world of the
yes,
and the world
yes.
and the last week the world of the human being and the angels. There's another practice that I picked up a couple of years ago and missed out this year of going to the Luke Gospel, which conveniently has 24 chapters, and starting on December 1st, taking some time, whether it be in the morning or the evening, that's everyone is a little different, and simply reading out loud one chapter of the Luke Gospel. Also read it silently, that's not required, of course. And then just allowing a period of silence to take place afterwards. And obviously on what is today, the 10th of December, that would be the 10th chapter. That's the sending of the 70 disciples. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing to think about in the middle of Advent. What could be my Advent sending this year? I'm just making this up as I go along. So,
Yeah.
But it's another lovely practice of. It's apparently been a practice in the Lutheran Church for centuries, and I just discovered it recently. Let's see. Who's your priest there in Perth? Who comes to visit?
Lisa Devine. We have a priest from Sydney that comes a couple of times a year. We live without a priest.
Lisa's on the call too. I bet she has some good ideas.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I don't see any other hands, either physical or virtual. Yeah, oh, no, I know. Yeah. I think Helena has her hand up. I can't do that, can I? Helena, you'll have to unmute yourself. She doesn't hear very well.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you please give me an example how the first, the second, third, and fourth week to concentrate on the mineral, the plant, animal, and then the human being? Can you give me an example for?
Yeah, well, let's see. Yeah.
There's so much.
Yeah, we have a big choice. There would be lots of things you could do. You could, let's say, the mineral kingdom. You could, for example, if you have minerals, various like quartz or crystals in your house, you might take one of those and just look at it. Look at the beauty, the planes, the angles, the light, the colors. For 5 minutes a day. Doesn't have to be an enormous undertaking. Something very simple and very concentrated also works quite well. Or if you're really ambitious and you want to work with the Bible, there is a book in the Bible called Revelation, which in the 21st chapter describes the New Jerusalem. And in this New Jerusalem, there are many minerals, many examples from the mineral kingdom involved. That's, of course, a very complicated story, but it's still quite beautiful. And of course, the first week of Advent is past, but one could catch up somehow or other and just read again, like with the Luke Gospel, to simply read that chapter and conjure up the pictures inwardly in one's own mind. Let's see, then come the plants. Well, Helena, you have such a beautiful garden. I think all you have to do is create a meditative mood and look out your window, and you would see all kinds of plants, right?
Yeah.
You might choose one particular plant and say, what kind of shapes are the leaves? Or what stage of its development is it in now that it's December? I think you have a different constellation in Auburn than we have in Chicago, because here everything is dead except the evergreen trees.
And here it is lovely.
Yeah, see, that's what I thought. You have so much beauty there, the colors, the shapes, the growth, the development, because the plant is a stage further than the mineral, so it moves. It has a certain life evident in it, where the mineral, we also assume, is alive, but it doesn't really show itself very much, right?
Mhm.
And then the animal world, yeah, there's a good one. Who's the biggest animal we know? The human being. Well, that's the next. Wait a minute. Back up. So we could think of a particular animal, study it through the week, its movements, its shape, its color, its size. Just a little concentration exercise. You could choose one animal for the whole week. Like think about the sheep or the goat or the chicken or the dog. And how does it relate to the plant world? How does it relate to the world of human beings? Animals are relators. They create relationships with other beings around them. And then the human being, or the angel, is often said. Then one could spend some time, perhaps, since we're in an anthroposophical gathering here, one might spend some time just reviewing one or the other of Rudolf Steiner's writings or lectures, where he expounds again and again and again on the human being in its fourfold nature, in its sevenfold nature, in its ninefold nature. Or you could also do something very simple, like the countenance of the human being.
Mhm.
If you're out and about, I love to do this. I kind of study people when I'm walking around the supermarket, or if I'm walking down the street or sitting in a cafe. I'll be looking around and, well, look at that guy over there. I wonder what mood he's in today, or what's he thinking about, or how interesting that he's reading an actual newspaper, or things like that. Just kind of to amaze oneself about the human being and what an unusual character we all are. I think that could be quite helpful in this Advent. Maybe a few examples?
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. And they say during Advent we prepare for the holy nights, and this preparation, how does it help us through the holy nights?
Well, I think anything that prepares us for Christmas will help us in our soul find our way into that mood that we try to create in those 12 days and nights. So it's kind of a threefold process. Now we have this path towards Christmas, and then we go through the night of Christmas itself into the morning. And then Christmas, you might say, reverberates into those 12 days. So you folks down there in around Atlanta, for the first time ever, will have the opportunity to experience the act of consecration every day during the Holy Nights. I'm sure that not everyone from Auburn and Nashville, I see Barbara there too, will be able to be there every day. But to create this center of energy in a place where it hasn't been in that form before, I think is going to be very exciting. Just little recent news for other folks around the world. And then the third step, of course, is then Epiphany itself, when we celebrate this moment of the arrival of the Christ in the being of Jesus.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. May
You're
I
so
ask
welcome.
you one thing more, and that is, do you plan to come to Auburn during the time you are in Atlanta?
I don't have a plan about that, but we can maybe talk about that separately sometime.
Oh, you do not have a plan.
Not at this moment. I don't have any plans except to show up in Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
You all see that Helena Burkhardt is quite a missionary for Auburn, Alabama. Always trying to get the priest to come, right?
Yes,
Good
that is right.
for you, Helena.
Yeah.
Somebody has to do it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Friends, I don't see any more hands. And we've been here for an hour and a half, so maybe this is good for a Saturday evening, Sunday morning, depending on where you are in the world. And I'd like to thank you again for showing up. And it's been a pleasure to unfold these thoughts with you, which I'm going to be doing all of December in different places. So this was my tryout. Thanks very much for listening ears.
Thank you, and all
Thank you.
the best for you.
All the best to all of you. Blessings for Advent.
Thank you. Blessed Advent.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Blessed Advent.
All right.